Can you tell us how you arrived at this dynamic pose?
Certainly. So this sculpture, Messenger, was first conceived of for an exhibition in a slightly different form back in 2015. And I was working with the theatre company Frantic Assembly. Director Scott Graham is very kind of exciting, works with performers, and it kind of ekes out very kind of interesting collaborative work from his actors. So I got to watch them in rehearsal, and there was one moment in this melee of actors doing Othello where a young female member of the cast was crouching in a kind of fight scene and paused momentarily and then moved on again. But something about this moment just struck me, and I kind of got them to return to it, and I took lots of digital scans of her in that moment, which was the basis of this.
So was it accidental that this figure turned out to be a woman?
No, I was conscious of how in my own work I made a lot of representations of the male body, and it was something I kind of was seeking to kind of address. I also have 2 daughters now, so that kind of changed my view on that situation, I suppose. So yeah, I think it was kind of conscious, and it was on the cards, and I was really pleased to be able to do it on this grand scale. Yeah.
So why has it been called Messenger?
So I was thinking about the way the creative process works in theatre, and how the actor carries the voice of somebody else, and how they are almost inhabited by the director or the writer. So I was interested in this idea of the artist as somebody who carries something to an audience, and maybe it's a message, or maybe it's the gift of what they can do, how they can transform things with their voice. So it was really about that creative process, and me as a visual artist studying another art form and thinking about what they did. And I suppose also, this piece, I was always aware that it's the scale of it, and it occupies a city centre, and it kind of operates on another level, which is sort of, more broadly for the kind of power of creativity within a society as well. So there's many levels to that kind of idea, I suppose.
Can you tell me then about its position in relation to the theatre, and how the sculpture relates to the architecture as a theatre as well?
Yeah, so I was really aware of that. There's a sort of triangular plaza at the front of the theatre, and the theatre's a brutalist 1980s building, kind of octagonal mainly in design, but very faceted, and there's these diagonals that run throughout the building, inlaid into various surfaces, including the carpets with flashes of colour. So I really liked the building. I liked the fact that the theatre had revamped it, respecting the 80s aesthetic, and it's the first time I'd seen that done in a building, and it's kind of amusing for me because I'm a child of the 80s, so it's nice to see that. So the sculpture, when she was positioned outside the theatre, I was kind of aware of the design aspect of that building, and it being kind of influencing the sculpture, but also the kind of idea of this theatre as a kind of vessel for creativity. It's holding all this kind of power in terms of the great stuff that's created within the building, and I wanted the kind of influence of it to almost be manifest physically onto the sculpture, so that the side of her which has all this faceting is the side that faces the theatre. So there's a sort of relationship between the object and the building that's kind of it's relating to.
And that faceting on the side of the sculpture, has that been done digitally?
Yeah, so I referred earlier to the way I kind of investigated the piece initially was with a 3D scanner, and I've been using digital technology a lot in making my sculpture over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And I'm really interested in the kind of current situation. We're living through a digital revolution. We have a computer in our pocket at all times, which we rarely let go of, and I was just really aware that this digital kind of stuff is falling through our hands all the time. We're losing our kind of, the stuff we're making is just depleting as soon as it's made, and I wanted to make a kind of monument to that, I suppose, to kind of hold on to that data. So I've made a lot of pieces which have use technology, and it's apparent in the surface of them and the way they're made. And it's just trying to capture that fleetingness, I suppose, of the digital.
And I suppose capturing something, a digital design in bronze is one of the most ancient, one of the most permanent ways you can do that.
Yeah, naturally, yeah. I mean, if you want to memorialise something, you make it in bronze, and that's kind of why I think that's really pertinent. I made another series just before I designed this for a town in Lincolnshire where I made 14 portraits of agricultural workers and Europeans who'd come to work in this country just at the time that the Brexit vote was happening, and they were all captured digitally as well. So I'd kind of worked on a really small scale with that idea beforehand as well, and they were in bronze.
Because you were saying about capturing a moment in time, about capturing digital data and freezing it. And I wonder how that digital data will change over time, and whether this will be looked back at as a very particular product of its time.
I hope so, in a way. You know, I think most great art does belong to its time in some way. You know, I think the idea of timelessness, in some ways, you know, I try to do that with my work, but also I kind of rail against it because it denies where you are coming from. So I hope it does speak of this moment in some way. So yeah, Messenger is 9 tons of bronze and stainless steel, and we've been working on it for over a year. Well, you know, the foundry mainly have been making it for over a year, and I was working on the design for a good amount of time before that. So yeah, it's really strange seeing it at such close quarters because it's like an extreme wide-angle lens in every shot. But once it's outside and you can stand back from it, I think you'll get a greater sort of understanding of her form. So obviously here she's sitting back on her bum. When she's stood up, that hand will be on the ground, and these protruding bits of stainless steel will be buried in the pavement. So it'll appear like her feet and hand just touch lightly on the ground, and she's in your space. So the kind of, you know, the feeling of coming across this gargantuan figure will be all the more apparent. She's not going to be framed by a plinth or any paving or anything. We've been very careful to make her just land in the city and just be there.
And you'll be able to walk through her legs as
Yes.
you're entering the theatre.
Yeah. So your head will be about knee height on her, I guess. So yeah, that's the sort of main street leading into the theatre, but also through Plymouth. And in fact, all the electricity, gas, broadband travels between her legs, and the foundations are either side of all this stuff. So it's been really complex getting her in exactly the right position, but we can just do it.
Can you describe the process from having a 3D printed woman, and how you scale that up and what needs to happen to arrive at a bronze like this? So yeah, the first iteration of it was a wooden sculpture I made, which was laser cut and slotted together. And then I developed that 3D printed one, and I designed it very carefully for a long time inside my computer, modelling it. And I modelled it in quite a lot of detail, and then I kind of destroyed that data to get these massive facets. So this is like the destruction of the data, if you like, that's happening. And these are just the points in space that described her form. But back on these curved surfaces, there's thousands of millions of points. In this model, there's like 4 million points or something. So this is like very little data. But what I was interested in was felt like a kind of a commentary on that creative process, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, to make it, we scaled up the model by using a massive robot inside an automotive kind of pattern making factory in Telford, and they carved loads of sections together, and glued them together, and then all these facets were hand finished to get the crisp edges and retain that kind of crisp, clinky digital crunchiness. And once that pattern was made, they were sent in parts to the foundry where they started to take rubber and resin moulds off all these sections. Wax was then laid into those moulds until a thickness was built up, and then the lost wax process, which you've been seeing here today at the foundry. So that's more mould making and burning the wax away, pouring the bronze in, and it was about 150 panels on the whole sculpture. And then those become welded
and
together.
they've all been welded together very carefully, and all those seams fettled and hidden. So yeah, this is the kind of colour we're going to go for, this black shadow-like, very flat colour. I think because of the scale, it was really nice to kind of keep it really simple, and there's something about, you know, the scale of the piece, but trying to make other things about her small and quieter, so that her pose, you know, is crouched, poised, full of energy, but small and condensed. And that felt right with the architecture of that bit of the city, because there's big buildings either side and trees. So she's in this sort of hidden plaza, and you'll come across her quite suddenly. And that feeling of her about to lurch forward into motion and pounce, you know, that's the sort of exciting gestalt moment of like in your face, first hit you in the guts kind of moment. Yeah. So you know, I really like the idea of this port city. People be coming to Plymouth on a ship from Brittany ferries from the continent, and then they'll drive through the city, and they'll just kind of have this moment where they'll see this thing as they're travelling through the city. And you know, for me, that's really what's exciting about placing figurative sculpture in like public space, because you have an animal response to it before you get to intellectualize, and that's a real moment of opportunity, I think, to kind of stir something within people and kind of communicate something quite simple.
Without wanting to push the gender side of it too much, what is she showing about the contemporary world with her gender and her pose? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but just kind of the general feeling.
I mean, I just felt like I was watching somebody at work, and the gender thing was kind of like, it should be irrelevant, but amazingly it was really relevant when the piece was announced, and a lot of the criticism was very sexualized and misogynistic, and I was quite amazed, you know, by that. And you know, I just sort of was interested in this as a young actor doing her work, and to depict that, I thought, was really, you know, it's quite an honest and straightforward thing. This was a theatre, this is somebody doing that. You know, when I did get those kind of reactions, it just made me realise that, well, that's incredible. It still is a political act to represent a woman who isn't sexualised or fey or romantic or a vessel for someone else's thoughts, although she is a vessel for a playwright, but that was kind of the point of the piece. What I mean is, she wasn't a vessel for, you know, like the idea of charity or chastity, or, you know, some kind of like Victorian notion of, or liberty. Yeah, I wasn't trying to use a woman's body as a kind of way of holding some civic ideas, or it was more, this was about the activity that goes on in this building and about creativity and the power of that.